My ex ignored me for weeks, then locked me in a remote cabin, so I turned the tables with a bold move that finally made him face the law. I dated this guy Kane for about 8 or 9 months. Things were mostly okay, but looking back there were definitely red flags I ignored. He was always kind of possessive and would get weirdly quiet when I talked about going out with friends. Anyway, we had a stupid fight about him constantly checking my phone, which he always did when I wasn't looking, and then he just disappeared. Complete ghost mode, no calls, no texts, blocked on everything. I was honestly relieved at first, like the relationship had been getting more stressful and the constant checking up on me was exhausting. But after 2 weeks of silence, I started to worry something had happened to him. I even called hospitals, which makes me feel like such an idiot now. After he ghosted, I went to this house party at my friend Nora's place. It was pretty crowded, and I was finally starting to feel normal again. I'd had a few drinks when I literally bumped into Kane while getting another drink. My stomach dropped, and I immediately turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Please," he said, "just hear me out." Nora saw us and came over, asking if everything was okay. I told her it was fine, which was my first mistake. Kane looked different. His eyes were all red like he'd been crying, and he kept saying how sorry he was for disappearing, how his mom had been in the hospital. Lie. And how he just couldn't handle anything else at the time. I should have walked away. I knew I should have walked away. But after a few more drinks and an hour of him apologizing and seeming genuinely remorseful, I stupidly agreed to let him drive me home. He was completely sober, hadn't touched a drink all night, which I thought was him being responsible. Turns out he had this whole thing planned. We got in his car, and at first everything seemed normal. We were talking, and he was being super attentive, asking about my work and family. But after about 30 minutes, I realized we weren't heading toward my apartment. When I asked where we were going, he just said he wanted to show me something special to make up for how he'd treated me. I started getting nervous when we left the city completely. The roads got darker, fewer streetlights than none at all. Just forest on both sides. I asked him to turn around, but he kept making excuses. "It's just a little further, or you'll love it when you see it." My phone was dying, and the signal was getting weaker. After hours of driving, mostly in silence because I was legit scared at that point, we turned onto this dirt road. No signs, nothing, just trees everywhere. My phone had no signal at all. The road kept getting rougher until we finally stopped in front of this run-down cabin. It looked abandoned, windows boarded up, porch sagging, middle of absolutely nowhere. "What is this place?" I asked, refusing to get out of the car. "It's my uncle's hunting cabin." "Get out," Kane said. When I said no, he reached across me, opened my door, and physically pulled me out. I started screaming, but there was literally nothing around us for miles. He grabbed my purse, took my phone, and then dragged me toward the cabin. I was kicking and fighting the whole way, but he's way stronger than me. Inside was dark and smelled like mold and dirt. He shoved me into a small room at the back that had no windows, just a disgusting mattress on the floor. The door had multiple locks on the outside. Before I could get up, he grabbed my shoes and left, locking the door behind him. I pounded on the door, screaming for him to let me out, that people would look for me. He just laughed and said, "Now you can't run." Then he told me if I tried to escape, he'd break my legs. I was trapped in that room. No food except some granola bars and water bottles he'd throw in occasionally. No light except when he'd open the door. Every time I screamed, he'd blast music so loud the walls shook. Once when it got quiet, I heard him say through the wall, "No one can hear you. No one knows where you are." I had no concept of time passing, no way to call for help. I tried talking to him when he brought water, begging him to let me go, promising I wouldn't tell anyone. He'd just stare at me with this empty look and say I needed to learn about consequences for abandoning him, which made no sense since he ghosted me at night. He'd sometimes sit outside the door and talk for hours about our future together. Like this was somehow normal. How we'd live at the cabin, how I'd learn to love it, how he'd take care of me if I just behaved. Sometimes he'd go silent for so long I thought he'd left me there to die. So, I guess I'm finally ready to write part 2 of this hell show because the first post barely scratched the surface. And honestly, I'm not even sure what I'm hoping for by posting all this. Except maybe that if anyone else ever ends up in something even a little like this, they'll recognize the signs and run because holy I sure didn't. Okay, I actually went back and reread what I wrote in part 1, and it almost sounds fake to me. Like, I wish it was, but I keep thinking about the way the mattress in that room felt under my knees, or the weird chemical plastic smell in the water bottles Kane tossed in, or how my own voice would go from yelling. And then I remember this was 100% real, and I'm not going to let anyone, especially myself, act like it was just a bad dream or that I was just overreacting. I've been asked to document everything I remember from those days spent locked up, so there will be a lot of detail. That first night was the longest night of my life. There's no clock in there, no phone, nothing. I could hear Kane moving around the cabin sometimes, creaking floorboards, or the weird thumping of music when he wanted me to shut up. The mattress was disgusting, like I don't even want to get into it, and the walls were that brownish fake wood paneling that peels off at the corners. My shoes were gone, my phone was gone, my purse was somewhere out in the living room. I heard him go through it. He left the door locked, but I could sometimes hear him pausing outside, listening. At first, I was just in pure panic mode. I think most people would be. I tried everything, yelling, pounding, even just trying to reason with him through the door, which is so embarrassing to admit now. But you get desperate, right? I tried apologizing for things I didn't even do because I thought maybe if I just said what he wanted to hear, he'd calm down and let me go. But every time I tried, he'd just laugh, or he'd get all serious and start lecturing me about trust and loyalty. And how could you abandon me after everything? Like, dude, are you for real? You're the one who ghosted me, not the other way around. But he just wouldn't let it go. It was like he'd rewritten the whole breakup in his head and I was the villain. The scariest thing is I started to get used to it, not in a this is fine way, but in a my body is just trying to survive way. My stomach hurt from hunger, but also from stress. And I kept thinking, okay, if I just wait this out, eventually someone will come looking for me. But then I realized, who though? Nora is the only one who even saw me leave the party. But I told her I was fine, my parents. Okay, my mom calls me every Sunday and I'd already missed one call by then. But she lives 2 states away and she's always threatening to come drag me home if I don't answer. But she never actually does it. My dad and I aren't close. He'd probably just assume I was busy. I kept replaying every conversation I'd had that week, wondering if anyone would even notice right away. It's such a messed up feeling realizing how easy it is to just disappear. Every time Kane came to the door, it was like flipping a coin. Sometimes he'd just drop a water bottle inside and leave. Other times he'd stand there and talk at me for ages. He never touched me, not after he shoved me in. But honestly, that didn't feel like comfort. It felt like he was saving up for something worse. He'd talk about everything from his family. His mom, who was not in the hospital, by the way. I checked after I got out and she was fine. To how nobody understood him, to how I was different and the only one who ever cared. He'd get all soft and sad. And then he'd snap and start yelling about how girls like you always run. And maybe now you'll learn what it's like to be left. No joke, the whiplash was insane. I didn't just sit there crying either, I was pissed, I kept thinking, screw this guy. I'm not just going to wait around hoping he decides to let me go. I started checking the room for anything I could use. There was literally nothing. Just the mattress, a plastic bottle, and a couple of granola bar wrappers. I started scraping at the doorframe with a metal zipper pull I found on the mattress. It was slow, but it helped me focus. I tried the hinges, the locks, the seams, but everything was solid. The walls were thin, though. I could hear Kane's phone sometimes, the stupid beeping of him texting or scrolling. I could hear him moving around, pacing, sometimes muttering to himself. The second night, things got weird. Kane came in and just stood in the doorway staring at me. I didn't even know what to say. I tried to act calm, like, what do you want? He just said I was lucky he cared enough to keep me safe out here, away from the people who poison you. I almost laughed. It was so over the top, but then he got all intense, talking about how he knew I'd try to run, and that's why I had to do this. It's not even like he was angry at me personally. It was like he was fighting with some imaginary version of me in his head. I started getting mouthy. I won't lie. I told him he was insane, that people would find out, that he was just making things worse for himself. He got right in my face, close enough that I could smell his breath, and started ranting about how all women are the same and nobody ever stays. I shoved him like hard. I don't even know where it came from. Just pure rage. And for a second, I thought he was going to hit me, but he just laughed and said, "See, this is what I mean." He grabbed my arm, not gentle, and pushed me back onto the mattress. Then he walked out. I just sat there shaking and realized I was not getting out of there by being polite. That night, I barely slept. I kept listening for any sign he was asleep so I could try the locks again. I started thinking about everything I'd ever seen in dumb survival shows, like maybe there was some trick I could use. I checked every inch of the mattress, ripped at the seams, tried the hinges again. No luck. I tried yelling, but after a while my voice just gave out. I think he liked knowing I was losing hope. Every time I got too loud, he'd crank up the music, so it felt like the walls were shaking. At one point, probably the third day, I lost track. To be honest, there's only so many times you can count water bottles and granola bars before your brain just stops. I heard him on a call outside the door. I couldn't make out the words, but he sounded stressed. He kept repeating my name over and over and then went silent. I started to think maybe someone was looking for me after all. Later that day, he brought me a hoodie from my own bag. He tossed it in and said, "You're cold, right? You should be grateful." I almost threw it back at him, but I kept it. I started to wonder if he was getting scared. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept, and his hands were shaking a little. On what I think was the fourth day, I finally snapped. I waited until he came in to check the locks, and I just went for it. I threw the water bottle at his head. It bounced off, didn't even leave a mark, but it was enough to piss him off. He lunged at me, and for a second I thought, this is it, he's going to actually hurt me. But I bit him, like actually bit his hand as hard as I could. He swore, yanked away, and shoved me back again. But I caught a glimpse of his keys on his belt. I tried to grab for them, but he was too quick. He started screaming at me, not even words, just pure rage, and then stormed out. I heard him pacing outside, kicking the wall. I sat on the mattress and tried to calm myself down, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept thinking, if I could just get those keys, maybe I could make a run for it. But then what? No shoes, no phone, no idea where I even was if I ran out there. Would I even know which way was the road? And what if he caught me? I started listening real close after that, trying to figure out his routine. He'd get up early, leave the cabin for a while, probably to get supplies. I kept hoping he'd just drive away and not come back, but no such luck. I heard a car once, way off in the distance, but by the time I started screaming, they were long gone. Every time I thought about just giving up, I'd get so mad my whole body would go tense again. The next day, he tried to play nice again. He brought me a sandwich, said he'd made it up special. I was so hungry I didn't even care anymore. I ate it. He started talking about how things could be different if I just stopped fighting him. He told me he never wanted it to be like this, that he didn't want to hurt anyone, and that if I just trusted him, he'd let me out soon. I asked him why he was doing this, why he thought any of this would work. He just said I needed to learn what it felt like to be left, to be scared, to have no control. He said his last girlfriend left him for dead, and that he wasn't going to let that happen again. It was like he was punishing me for every girl who'd ever hurt him, not just me. I tried to reason with him honestly. I told him my family would come looking, that Nora knew I was with him, that people would get suspicious. He just shrugged and said nobody cared, that I'd made it clear who I wanted. He said he'd wait it out as long as he had to, and he wasn't afraid of my friends. That's when I realized he seriously didn't think anyone would notice I was gone. He thought he could just keep me here forever and nobody would even knock on his door. That pissed me off more than anything. So, I started making noise, like real noise. Every time he left, I'd scream, pound on the walls with the water bottle, drag the mattress across the floor. I was trying to make it sound like a disaster in there, hoping maybe, just maybe, if anyone was ever nearby, they'd hear. He'd come back furious and crank the music even louder. But I didn't stop. If he wanted me quiet, he'd have to drag me out himself. By the end of the 5th day, I was done waiting. I didn't care anymore if he snapped. I waited by the door, ready to throw myself at him if he came in. When he finally opened it, he looked exhausted. He tried to act all calm like we were just having a normal conversation. I told him if he didn't let me go, I'd find a way out myself, and he just smiled and told me I wasn't going anywhere. But here's the thing. When he left this time, he forgot to fully latch the top lock. It was barely a crack, but it was something. I spent the next hour or whatever. Time means nothing in there working at it with my zipper pull until it finally gave. The door still wouldn't open. There was another lock at the bottom, but now there was a gap big enough to see out into the hallway. I could see my purse sitting on the floor and Kane's jacket tossed over a chair. No sign of my phone, but I could hear it vibrating somewhere, maybe in his pocket or in another room. I could see the main door to the cabin from there. And for the first time, I thought maybe I could actually get out. I didn't sleep at all that night. Just waited for any sound, any chance. I kept thinking about my mom, about Nora, even about my dad who'd probably say this was all my fault for trusting the wrong guy. I thought about all the stupid normal things I wanted to do. Scroll in reels in my own bed, make coffee in my own kitchen, hear my roommate complain about the Wi-Fi. Stupid regular life stuff. I was so angry that Kane thought he could just take that away from me, like I was some doll he could lock up until he felt better about himself. If you're reading this and thinking it sounds wild, yeah, it was, but I swear it's real. If you're still here after my first 2 posts, seriously, thanks. I don't even know why I keep writing this out except that every time I try to talk about it with people IRL, their eyes go all wide and they start asking questions I can't answer. Or worse, they just stare at me like I'm exaggerating. Like TBH, even reading it back myself, it still looks unreal. But I keep replaying it in my head. Every little detail, every gross, ordinary, awkward thing that happened, like my brain's trying to make it make sense. It doesn't, but whatever. So, last thing I posted, I'd figured out that Kane hadn't latched the top lock all the way on the door. I'd spent forever working at it with that dumb zipper pull, which honestly was like the only thing keeping me from losing my mind, just having something to do. I managed to wedge a gap, maybe an inch, enough to peek into the hallway. I could see my purse, his jacket, and hear his phone somewhere, but not see it. No clue if he was sleeping somewhere else in the cabin or just keeping watch, but every sound put me on edge. I started planning like not some badass movie plan, just the most basic, desperate stuff. Wait for him to come in, try to catch him off guard, grab the keys if I could, or just barrel past him and make for the front door. I had 0 shoes, nothing in my hands except that metal zipper pull, and my feet were already a mess from pacing the nasty floor. I kept replaying the details, which side the locks were on, how often he left the cabin, what he did with his jacket and keys. I almost started making a tally in my head like, how many times does he come in? How long is he gone? It was like trying to solve a puzzle while starving and sleep-deprived. But the thing that really started getting to me was the quiet. Not the kind of quiet you hear when you're safe at home, but the weird, heavy quiet when you know someone else is listening. Sometimes at night, I'd hear Kane pacing or just sitting outside the door breathing. Sometimes I'd hear the music again, or his voice talking to himself. Once he started muttering about his ex, not me, some other girl, and how people always left him, how his family never listened and no one cares. He sounded more bitter than angry, like he was arguing with ghosts. I started yelling back through the door, not even words half the time, just noise, because I figured if he was going to treat me like a problem, I was going to be the loudest problem possible. He'd respond by blasting music or sometimes coming in acting all calm, which somehow was worse than when he was mad. Once he sat on the floor outside the door and started telling me about how his dad used to keep him in line and how he learned not to trust women after his last girlfriend set him up. I kept thinking, who even says this stuff out loud? Much less to someone they locked in a room. On what I think was day 6, the dynamic shifted. I heard Kane on the phone actually talking to someone this time in the kitchen. He was being weirdly normal, telling someone he was helping a friend move stuff at the cabin and that he might be out of service for a few days. He laughed at one point. I remember thinking, are you actually joking around like this is just a camping trip? I tried to remember if anyone in his family even knew about this cabin. He never mentioned his uncle's name, never said who owned it. Now, the more I tried to piece it together, the more I realized how little I really knew about his family. He'd always been weirdly closed off, but I'd chalked it up to being private, not dangerous. The next time he brought food, barely a sandwich, I tried a different strategy. Just started talking about random stuff, asking about his mom, about his old dog, anything to get him off script. He got suspicious, asked why I suddenly cared, but I just kept talking. I figured if I could keep him off balance, maybe he'd slip up. He got annoyed, said I was trying to manipulate him but didn't leave. Instead, he started ranting about how my friends never liked him and how Nora was always butting in. I told him Nora would 100% notice if I was gone for this long. He scoffed, said nobody cared, that I was replaceable. I lost it at that point. Called him every name I could think of, and he just left the room. Later that night, when he came back, something had shifted. He said his mom had called, wondering where he was, and he needed me to prove everything was fine. He tossed my hoodie at me, told me to put it on, then brought his phone into the room and pointed the camera at me. He said, "Just tell her you're fine, you're with me, and that you don't want anyone to worry." I froze for a second, then figured, okay, if I played along, maybe I could slip in a hint. But right as he started recording, he was standing just off camera, watching me like a hawk. So, I said, "Yeah, I'm okay, just out at the cabin, no service. Don't worry, everything's fine." I tried to look as calm as possible, but my hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I almost said something about Nora or my family, but he caught the hesitation and stopped recording. He stared at me for a long time, then deleted the video and turned the phone off. He said, "You're not going to play games, not with me." He left and this time locked every single bolt on the door. I sat in the dark feeling like I just missed my only shot. Meanwhile, I started thinking about my own family. My mom's not exactly chill. She's the type to blow up my phone if I miss a call, start messaging all my friends, even try my old roommate if she doesn't hear from me. But she also travels a lot, and sometimes it takes her days to notice I'm missing. My dad, I knew, would just assume I was off-grid, but my mom, if she really thought something was wrong, she'd go nuclear. I started hoping she'd call Nora or even Kane himself, but I had no way to know what was happening outside. I spent most nights awake trying to time Kane's movements in the cabin. He'd sometimes leave for what felt like hours, probably going into whatever town was nearest to get supplies. There were a few times I thought about just breaking the door down, but even with the loose lock, it was still too solid and my feet were a wreck. I kept picking at the lock with the zipper pull. Sometimes just for something to do, sometimes hoping the noise would annoy him enough to come in and mess up. I even started talking to myself just to keep my head straight, reciting song lyrics, stupid TikTok trends, anything to feel normal. On what might have been the 7th day, something changed. I heard a car pull up way outside, not Kane's, a different engine. My heart went wild for a second. I thought, what if it's someone coming to check the place? I started yelling, pounding on the door with a water bottle, making as much noise as possible. Kane came tearing into the room, grabbed my arm, and hauled me away from the door. He was furious, yelling that I was ruining everything, and that if I didn't calm down, he'd make sure nobody ever found me. He shoved me onto the mattress and stormed out. I heard him outside talking to someone, couldn't make out the words, just the tone. I kept yelling, but no one came to the door, and after a while the other car left. After that, Kane went full paranoid. He started double-checking the locks, moving my stuff farther away. He even took the mattress out at one point just so I'd have nothing to sit on, which was a whole new level of petty. He started talking at me through the door about how it was my fault things were getting worse and how he knew I'd try something. He said he trusted me and that I'd broken that trust. The way he talked, it was like he genuinely thought this was all my doing, like I'd somehow forced him into this whole situation. I started realizing this wasn't just about me. He was fighting with himself, stuck in some loop where every woman who ever left him was the same. And I was just the latest. That day, the hunger got so bad I started to feel foggy but weirdly determined, like, if I was going to go down, I was going to go down loud. I waited until he came in to bring water, and this time I lunged at him. I don't even know what my plan was, just pure desperation. I grabbed at his shirt, tried to knock him off balance, but he shoved me hard, sending me straight into the wall. I kicked him hard and he cursed and backed off. He looked shocked, honestly, like he didn't expect me to fight back. He started ranting about how I was just like the rest and never grateful. I told him he was pathetic, that his mom would be ashamed, and he just snapped, yelling right in my face, veins bulging. That night, I could hear him pacing for hours. At one point, I heard his phone ring, his actual ringtone, not just notifications, and he answered. He was whispering, kept saying, "Yeah, she's fine, yeah, she's safe. No, nobody's coming out here." I heard my own name once, and then he hung up. I started thinking, Was that my mom or Nora or someone else? I tried to remember who even had his number if anyone would think to call him. It made me feel sick, thinking about how close I might have been to getting out. Here's where things got even weirder. The next morning, Kane came in and tossed a bag at me. Snacks, water, even a pair of socks. He said, "Congrats, you finally earned something." I just stared at him, and he told me if I behaved, he'd make things easier. I told him to screw himself, and he got all quiet, then started talking about how he never wanted to hurt anyone, and that this is just how things have to be. He said he wouldn't let anyone take me away, and that if I tried to leave, I'd regret it. I told him he was a coward, and he just looked at me, eyes all empty, and left. That afternoon, I tried the lock again. I wedged a piece of plastic from the snack bag into the gap, trying to force it wider. I could barely move it, but it was progress. I started wondering if maybe I could break the hinge, or at least make enough noise to get someone's attention next time a car came by. My hands were shaking, but I kept at it until I heard Kane coming back. I hid the plastic and acted like nothing happened. Later that day, I heard him on the phone again. This time, arguing. He sounded frustrated, kept saying things like, "I told you she's fine, just leave it and I'll be back when I'm ready." I started to hope maybe someone was suspicious. Maybe someone would actually show up. But I also started to get scared because the more stressed he got, the more unpredictable he became. That night, I decided to risk everything. When Kane brought in water, I told him I needed to use the bathroom. He hesitated, then finally agreed, grabbing my arm and leading me down the hall. The second I got a look at the main door, I bolted, just ran for it, sock feet slipping on the old floorboards. He tackled me before I made it, and we went down hard. I scratched, kicked, bit, anything I could do. He dragged me back to the room, yelling the whole way, and threw me inside. I heard him breathing heavy outside, muttering about how I was forcing his hand and how he couldn't trust anyone. I sat in the dark, shaking, but weirdly satisfied that I'd at least tried. After that, he barely spoke to me. He brought food and water, but nothing else. He started sleeping in front of the door, I think, because I could hear him snoring at night. I spent hours just staring at the crack in the door, trying to memorize every sound, every creak of the floorboards, waiting for another chance. Meanwhile, outside, I found out later things were heating up. Nora had tried to call me 1,000,000 times, then started messaging my mom when I didn't answer. My mom started calling Kane, who ignored her, then tried to file a missing person report, but the cops said it was too soon since adults can go off-grid. Yeah, thanks for nothing. Nora talked to some of my other friends, but nobody had seen me since the party. My mom even called my old roommate, who hadn't heard from me in months. I don't even know how many people were actually worried. But I do know Nora was losing her mind because when I finally got my phone back, I saw like 60 texts from her, plus a ton of missed calls. Every day was the same routine, Kane bringing food, me trying to talk him into letting me out, him ranting about how I was just like everyone else. I tried everything, begging, bargaining, threatening, even just going silent. Nothing worked. He was stuck in his own head, convinced that he was the victim, that I owed him for leaving. I heard a car again, this time closer, and it didn't leave right away. Kane went out to talk to whoever it was, and I heard voices, but couldn't make out the words. He came back tense, slamming things around, cursing. He told me that people were asking questions, and that I'd better be on my best behavior if I didn't want things to get worse. I decided then that I wasn't waiting any longer. I started planning again, using every scrap of info I'd gathered, his routines, the lock, the door, even the layout of the cabin. I hid a piece of metal from the snack bag in my sleeve, ready to use as a weapon or a tool. I started faking being sick, hoping he'd let his guard down. He didn't, but he started getting sloppy, leaving the door unlocked for a second, forgetting to take my water bottle. I kept watching, waiting, ready to make my move. And then, right as I was about to try again, Kane came into the room looking rough. He said, "You want to leave so bad? Fine." He grabbed my arm, dragged me outside, and pointed at the woods. He said, "Go ahead, run." I just stared at him, not sure if it was a trap or if he'd really lost it. He looked at me, eyes wild, and said, "Nobody's coming, you're on your own now." That's where I'll leave it for now. I know you're all probably screaming at me to just run, but believe me, nothing about this felt simple or safe. I still don't know if I've got my head on straight enough to tell this in a way that makes sense, But I'm just going to start. I've been sitting on this for a while, not sure how much to share or what even matters anymore, but people keep DMing me asking what happened, and honestly, I kind of need to get it out of me. So, here's what happened after he dragged me out and pointed at the woods, telling me to go if I really wanted it that bad. I looked at him, trying to figure out if he was bluffing or if he was actually going to chase me down or worse. He looked wild, unshaven, eyes all bloodshot, like he hadn't slept for days. He was shaking a little but holding his phone in one hand and something metal, maybe his keys, maybe a pocket knife. Honestly, I couldn't tell and wasn't about to get closer to check in the other. I was wearing socks, my hoodie, and nothing else but the same jeans from the party. It was cold as hell, probably mid-morning, and I was already tired down to my bones. I didn't run at first. I just stood there staring at the trees, thinking, what? I'm supposed to just take off into the woods with nothing. I had no idea which way the road was. No phone, no food, not even shoes. I glanced back at the cabin, thinking maybe I could double back for my stuff. But Kane just stood there breathing hard, waiting. I started to wonder if he even wanted me to try, or if this was some new messed up test. He started yelling. Not even words, just noise like he was daring me to go. So, I moved. Not fast, not slow, just walking, keeping my head down, watching his shadow in the corner of my eye. He followed. Not close enough to grab me, but close enough. I tried to remember all those dumb hiking videos about moss growing on the north side of trees or whatever, but literally nothing looked familiar. There was a path kind of, but it was overgrown. And after maybe 5 minutes, he stopped following and just yelled that if I got lost, it wasn't his problem anymore. I wanted to believe him. I kept walking, picking my way between branches, stepping in mud, my socks going gray and slick. There was nothing but trees for ages. At one point, I heard birds, which felt weirdly hopeful, like maybe I'd find a road or a house or something, but nope, just more woods, more roots, more silence. My feet started to hurt, and I realized I was bleeding from some old cut that had opened up again. I thought about calling for help, but my throat was raw, and honestly, I didn't know who would even hear me. After I don't know, maybe an hour, time didn't make sense anymore. I started to loop back, or at least it felt like it. The trees all looked the same. I started to panic because what if he was just waiting for me to get lost so he could drag me back? I kept going, trying to keep in a straight line. But after a while, I heard something branches snapping not far off. I froze. Kane stepped out from behind a tree looking pissed. He said, "You really thought you'd get far?" He grabbed my arm hard and started dragging me back toward the cabin. I fought him hard. I twisted, kicked, elbowed him in the gut. He cursed and almost dropped his phone. I scratched his neck. He shoved me. We both went down in the dirt. I managed to get a knee in his ribs and pull away, but he caught my hoodie and yanked me back. We both ended up sprawled on the ground, breathing heavy, mud everywhere. I spat at him, told him to just let me go, and he got up, looming over me, eyes wild. He started yelling about how I was ungrateful, and just like everyone else, how he'd tried to give me a chance, and I was throwing it away. I screamed back that he was never going to control me, that this was his problem, not mine, and that nobody would believe his. He got right in my face, breathing hard, fists clenched, and I honestly thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he just stormed ahead, dragging me by the wrist back to the cabin. When we got inside, he shoved me into the main room and started pacing. He kept muttering about how he couldn't trust anyone, and how everyone always leaves. He threw his phone across the room, breaking it against the wall, and just stood there staring at the pieces. I sat on the floor, breathing hard, trying to figure out if I could make another run for it. He turned on me, said I was lucky he hadn't done worse, and that if I ever tried that again, I'd regret it. I told him to go to hell. He laughed, but it sounded more like crying. The rest of that day was weirdly quiet. Kane barely spoke. He just kept pacing, sometimes sitting in the corner, staring at nothing, then jumping up to check the windows or poke at the door. I started wondering if he was coming down from something. He looked rough, shaking, eyes darting everywhere. He barely touched the food he brought in, just tossed me some crackers and water, and left me alone. At some point, maybe that evening, the power went out. Not that there was much power to begin with, but whatever little light had been in the living room just died. Kane started freaking out. digging around for batteries, cursing under his breath. He asked if I'd messed with anything, and I told him I didn't even know where the fuse box was. He got all paranoid, started talking about how they're coming and how nobody is safe. I realized then that he was losing it, like actually losing his grip. Not just angry or controlling, but full-on paranoid. I started thinking, maybe this is my shot. If he was distracted enough, maybe I could get to the door or find my phone. I waited until he went into the back room to look for a flashlight, then crept over to where he'd thrown his phone. The screen was shattered, but I tried turning it on anyway. Nothing. Total brick. I almost cried, but then I remembered my own phone. He'd shoved it in a drawer somewhere. I'd seen him do it when I first got there. I started searching, quiet as I could, opening drawers, feeling around under the couch. I found my purse, empty, and a pile of junk mail, but no phone. Kane came back in, flashlight in hand, and caught me. He demanded to know what I was doing. I said I was looking for something to eat. He stared for a long time, then tossed me a bag of chips and told me not to move. He kept the flashlight on me the whole time like I was some animal he was afraid would bolt. That night, I barely slept. I could hear Kane moving around, muttering to himself, opening and closing doors. At one point, he tried to turn on the old radio in the corner, but it just crackled static. He swore, then went quiet. I started to wonder if maybe someone really was coming. If maybe Nora had gotten through to my mom, or if the cops were finally checking out that missing person report. But I had no way to know. It felt like the world had shrunk down to just this cabin, these four walls, these endless nights. The next day, Kane was even more on edge. He barely looked at me, just kept checking outside like he was expecting someone. At one point, he told me to pack up my stuff. I laughed because, what stuff? He shoved my purse at me and told me to get ready. I asked where we were going, and he said, somewhere safe. I said, safe for who? He glared, then just started throwing things into a bag. Food, water, his jacket, whatever he could grab. He told me to hurry up or he'd leave me there. I debated calling his bluff, but then he grabbed my arm and dragged me outside. We got in the car, which was running rough and almost out of gas. Kane was sweating, looking around like he expected someone to jump out of the trees. He sped down the dirt road, swerving around potholes, barely slowing for the turns. I kept watching the dashboard, wondering if we'd run out of gas and be stuck in the middle of nowhere. He kept muttering about how they were coming, how he couldn't trust anyone, and how I'd ruined everything. I just sat silent, waiting. After maybe half an hour, the car started sputtering. Kane cursed, hit the wheel, and pulled over near some clearing. He grabbed his bag and told me to get out. I hesitated, so he grabbed my arm and dragged me out, shoving me ahead of him into the woods. I kept thinking, okay, this is it. This is where he snaps for real. My heart was pounding, but I kept moving, watching for any chance to break away. Suddenly, we heard a car in the distance, real close this time, maybe coming down the main road. Kane froze, listening. I saw my chance and bolted, tearing off through the trees, not even caring about branches or rocks. I heard him yelling behind me, crashing after me, but I just kept going. I slipped, fell, got up, kept running. I burst out onto the road, waving my arms like a lunatic, screaming for help. A silver SUV slowed down, some woman staring at me like I was insane. Kane crashed out of the woods behind me, yelling. The woman rolled down her window, asking what was going on. I just kept yelling, begging her not to leave. Kane tried to grab me, but I ducked behind the SUV. The woman got out, put herself between us, told Kane to back off. He started yelling at her, saying I was his girlfriend and that I was having a meltdown. She didn't buy it, told him she was calling the cops. Kane tried to reach for me again, but the woman blocked him. I could see her hand shaking, but she stood her ground. Kane glared at both of us, then finally backed off, muttering that he didn't need this. He turned and disappeared, back into the woods. The woman pulled me into the car, locked the doors, and started driving. She handed me her phone and told me to call whoever I needed. I tried my mom first, but she didn't pick up, so I called Nora. She answered on the first ring, screaming my name. I could barely get the words out, but she just kept asking where I was, if I was safe. The woman drove me to the nearest gas station where I waited for Nora and my mom to show up. The cops came, took my statement, started searching for Kane. I spent hours just sitting in the back of Nora's car, wrapped in a blanket, drinking coffee from a paper cup. My mom showed up, yelling and hugging me at the same time, demanding to know what happened. I couldn't even explain it all. Every time I tried, the words got stuck. Nora just sat next to me, holding my hand, shaking. The cops found the cabin, but Kane was gone. They said he'd probably taken off into the woods, maybe hitchhiked out. There was nothing left but the mess we'd made. Broken furniture, empty food wrappers, my old shoes in the corner. They took pictures, bagged up evidence, asked me to walk them through everything. I kept waiting for them to say it was all a misunderstanding or that I'd made it up, but they just nodded, took notes, told me they'd do what they could. My mom wanted me to move back home, said she'd never forgive herself if something happened again. Nora kept texting, checking in every hour, asking if I needed anything, bringing over groceries. I tried to sleep, but every noise made me jump. I started getting letters from victim services offering counseling and legal help. Kane's family never reached out. I heard through Nora that his mom was in denial, insisting he'd never do something like that I must have misunderstood. Typical. I guess it's easier for people to make up their own stories than face what's right in front of them. My own family went into overdrive, my mom checking my location every 5 minutes. My dad calling to say he could have warned me about guys like Kane. I tried to go back to normal. I went to the grocery store, the pharmacy, walked around my block, but every time someone looked at me for too long, I felt like they knew. Nora stuck by me, but even she started getting tired, like she wanted things to go back to how they were, but I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about the cabin, the woods, Kane's face when he realized I was really gone. I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was over, that he'd been caught, but nobody did. The cops say they're still looking for Kane, so yeah, that's the end. Or at least the end for now. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. If you ever get even a whiff of someone acting like Kane, run. I'm locking my doors now.